Oh, this is the word of the Lord. Thank you, Hank, for that reading. I'm going to start with a quote from Reverend William Sloane Coffin, who has passed away, but he was one of the more well-known pastors at Riverside Church in New York. Says Christians have to listen to the world as well as the word, to science, to history, what reason and our own experience tell us. We do not honor the higher truth we find in Christ by ignoring truths found with we do not honor the higher truth we find in Christ by ignoring truths found elsewhere. I have to say that this story that Hank just read from Acts 17, Paul's encounter with the Greek philosophers and leaders in Athens, at Mars Hill, which is a kind of a city, my understanding, it's an outcropping where the city, more like the city council, would meet. Civic, religious, legal matters would be hashed out. It is one of my favorite stories of the adventures of our brother Paul, the apostle. I'm used to Paul's letters where, to be honest, I'm thinking a lot of you could share this too, his tones are often, at least to our modern ears, a bit authoritarian, heavy-handed, caustic, and polemic. Or as one scholar writing the introduction to Paul's letter to Corinthian church puts it, Paul's letter is a letter of exhortation and pastoral counsel. And then he says, Paul reinforces his arguments with reprimand, irony, threats, and less frequently with praise. Here, I'm granted this story from Acts isn't one of the letters, but it is a story about Paul. And here Paul is bringing the gospel message to the marketplace, and he truly seems to have a tone of respectfulness and engagement, which I really like. It's a good model for us. While Paul is waiting to rendezvous with his cohorts, Silas and Timothy in Athens, he walks around the city and he observes. He, we assume, listened to all the talk and the debates and the speeches from various Greek philosophers. He observed the many statues of the various gods. He is both, the scripture tells us, impressed and troubled by the plurality of views. And after noticing and getting some sense of the culture, he makes an observation on one site in particular, an altar dedicated to an unknown God. He then uses this observation to enter into an engaging conversation with the elite citizens who gather on Mars Hill or the Areopagus. Same thing. He flatters them with a true and sincere fact. He says, it's kind of an entry point really for him. He says, I see that in every way you are a very religious people. And I also noticed all your statues. And one in particular, an altar dedicated to an unknown God, strikes me with interest. So from there, he launches into telling them about the God he knows about, the one God, the God of creation, the man Jesus who rose from the dead. The text then says that some believed him, some scoffed at him, and some continued to be interested in further conversation. Now, anyone who gets out and speaks publicly is making themselves vulnerable. And we like to think of the Greeks as really open to all kinds of new ideas and thoughts, and they were, from what I understand. But at the same time, they, like a lot of humans, they had their limits to their tolerances. If you recall, the story of Socrates was asked, not asked, he was told to drink poison to kill himself because they didn't like what he was saying. So Paul's putting himself out there a little bit. He's taking some risk. I love how Paul enters in this story. I really love how he enters into the arena of ideas. And I love even more how the Greek philosophers, like I said, had this open marketplace for seeking ideas within limits and new insights by creating a space for open discussion, debate, and conversation, a place where we would hope honest seeking of truth was pursued. Philosophy literally means the love of wisdom. Phileo meaning love, Sophie or Sophia, wisdom. And here is why I say that this story really is relevant for us. It launches us into the significant question of our times. How do we witness to our faith? And I know and I agree, our best and most fundamental witness as Christians is through our acts of love, through projects of and acts of charity and justice. Let's just take that as a given, and it is true, as the song says, they will know we are Christians by our love. In other words, they will know we are Christians by our loving actions. But the question I ask this morning is, how do we talk about our faith? How do we communicate our faith? How does it feel to say to someone, I'm a Christian? Do you cringe a little bit in these times? Do you feel a bit apologetic, maybe slightly embarrassed? Does the word itself repel people toward the faith and invite a conversation, or does it attract? And when I ask, do you feel embarrassed? I don't mean embarrassed of Jesus. I mean embarrassed of the word Christian. Christian literally means a follower of Jesus, yet the label too often is associated with anything but. For this reason, I feel a bit apprehensive about how I self-identify around this name, and it makes me sad. It shouldn't be this way, because this is my faith. This is your faith. But so much has been done, as we know, to misrepresent our faith. It makes conversations about faith awkward. And it seems to be even more so lately than ever I remember. I mean, we have to deal with the likes of Pat Robertson, Paula White, Joel Osteen, John Hagee, Robert Jeffress, Jerry Falwell Jr., Franklin Graham, Jim Baker, and on and on and on. These are the ones that get out there on TV programs and so forth. All guilty of religious malpractice as far as I'm concerned. And then we have their lavish lifestyles, and we have the sexual scandals, and we have the racism, we have the hate against gays, Muslims, Jews, women, and on it goes. The hostility toward facts, the anti-science or embracing of pseudoscience, and then there's the historical use of the faith, as we all painfully know, to justify slavery, and the use of faith to steal the lands of non-Christians, that is, indigenous peoples upon whose land we reside now. And oh, we can't forget the Crusades and the Inquisition. Well, that's not a very good sermon to be stuck on, is it? But, so everything that is beautiful and true and just and decent and joyful, all these things that faith for us is about, Satan or whatever force we use to describe evil has defiled and placed the name Christian beside it. It's taken what is good and made it evil, and done what is evil and called it good. So yes, of course it is. I say this, I guess, just to affirm the fact that we have right to be a little humbled, to say the least, about when we speak of our faith. It's understandable we may feel a little bit shy, but here's the thing. I would suggest we don't do God or ourselves, or most importantly, the world, any favors in hiding our identity as Christian. We just have to identify ourselves in such a way that reflects the true nature of God's love in Christ Jesus. I recall reading a book a while back called Blue Like Jazz by fellow named Donald Miller. So he writes as a Christian, and he writes from his experience as a student at Reed College in Oregon, which is quite liberal and certainly a place where if you identify as Christian, feels quite awkward. It would be probably somewhat similar to Paul going into the marketplace or the town square in Athens. To say one is Christian in that context, or in a lot of contexts, one might seem ridiculous, odd, or quaint. Not labels anybody wishes to be identified with, but one of the things I remember him doing in this book is setting up a confession booth on the campus of Reed College. But it had a different twist. It was a booth whereby he and his friend would sit and ask people to come and listen to them confess the sins of the church, historically and currently, that needed to be named and spoken and atoned for. And it seems to have had a remarkable effect. The mere act of being vulnerable, of being humble, of admitting the true sins of the church seemed to open up, help people open up to them talking of their own stories and their own pains and their own hurts and their own need for being heard and being forgiven. Like Paul in Athens, Miller and his friends were seeking to evangelize by speaking truth. And the truth of the church, 2,000 years after the Apostle Paul, is that we as Christians have a lot of confessing to do. Storytelling, confessing, forgiveness, authenticity, vulnerability, longing, healing. Isn't this really the heart of the gospel? Isn't that really what people are looking for? Our culture, like the Greek culture in Athens, is deeply spiritual. It's inherent to who we are as human beings. The majority of people recently polled in the USA identified with no particular religion. For the first time, religious people are in the minority, and that's primarily Christian people because it's dominant religion in America. Yet the majority still say they are deeply spiritual. They just aren't religious. So let's forget about maybe being religious and let's share the common drive to be spiritual, but spiritual in such a way as to have a unique and wonderful biblical narrative that we have that gives us a sense of community and vision and hope and meaning. We live in a post-Christian Western culture, but we're not done with the faith. I'm not. I haven't abandoned it. I hope, by definition of the fact that we're all here this morning now together, we aren't among the duns, those who never really had a quarrel with Jesus, in fact, still love Jesus, but could no longer abide with an institution which with so much dark and awful and unchristian baggage. We're still a part of a church that seeks to reinvent itself to fit a postmodern reality. I want to conclude. I actually pulled out two YouTube clips. One is a stereotypical bad example, and another is an example of a good way to engage faith in the marketplace. I'm going to forego the bad one because I know you're familiar with it. It's just an image of a street preacher who's, is kind of yelling at people about accepting Jesus and being saved before they die and burn in hell. We've all seen those, folks who probably are not probably, almost certainly are driving more people away than they are pulling them toward the faith. So I'm going to forego that because we're familiar with it. But I want to give an example of someone I think. I just was listening to him recently because he'd done an interview on PBS. They've got a segment called Amanpour and Company that he's interviewed Dr. Cornel West, who has taught at Harvard, Yale, Princeton. I think he's now at Union Seminary. I'm not sure. To me, he clearly writes and speaks out of the prophetic Christian tradition, but he does so in such a way I find that is respectful, disarming, and also direct and uncompromising and forceful. Because he's a well-known speaker and writer and teacher, he has access to our modern form of the ancient Greek city center, where ideas are shared and debated. That is the medium of television in some form or another. He was recently, as I said, interviewed on PBS segment. So, and the question was really not about religion per se. He was asked to speak about the recent trend in colleges and universities that are dropping the classics departments, the study of the ancient thoughts of Greek and early Western cultural thinkers. But I want you, as you listen to this interview, you will hear him weave in and out of the conversation his Christian faith. So if Rachel, could you show that?
I got it.
There was way more in that, but throughout that, it's about an 18-minute interview with Dr. Cornel West, but he's always spoken, whenever I've heard him, out of the prophetic Christian voice, without apology. In fact, that is the foundation out of which, and yet at the same time, as I've noticed him speak throughout the years, he interweaves a sense of we're all in this together. It's not an exclusive, the pursuit of justice and the healing of the world is not an exclusive call to the Christian tradition, but it is out of that tradition that he speaks, that he's not afraid of saying he comes out of the Christian prophetic tradition. It's just part of who he is. And he recognizes and values the contributions of other faith perspectives, including those of non-religious folks. So, and he understands we're all rowing toward the same shore as long as we're helping to bend the arc toward justice. And finally, and I also love the way he calls others brother and sister, regardless of their belief system. Doesn't polarize. Well, so it is possible. I think he's an example of it is possible to engage conversation in the marketplace of ideas from your Christian perspective and still be seeking that common connection, that common spiritual connection that holds us all together. So that's why I kind of spliced him in. There are many, many others who bear witness to their Christian faith, I think, in a good way. But we feel like we're in the minority sometimes. And because it's been represented so poorly by many in who call themselves Christian, it makes us a little shy. But I'm hoping we can find ways at Hyde Park Mennonite Fellowship to express our faith in a way that feels exciting, inviting, prophetic, and life-giving to not just ourselves, but those we may have conversations with or want to invite to join us in that exploration of faith journey together. We're not all given the privileges and powers of academic elites like Dr. Cornel West. God has appointed us the setting, the time, and the circumstances of our own reality to express the love of Jesus into the world. So let us rejoice in our divinely apportioned calling. Let us never forget that Christ is being expressed in and through us. And let us never give in to the compulsion to hide our light under a bushel. Proclaim Christ always as St. Francis said, and if necessary, and when appropriate, use words. Words are important too. Conversations are important, or important. Engagement is important. I want to have a little conversation. What is your experience in terms of sharing your faith? What are your hesitations? And when does it feel appropriate? And how can we do so in such a way that invites a true and respectful dialogue for the seeking of authentic faith and truth? Sometimes, and this particular story from Paul is powerful in another way. It seems that Paul was first immersing himself, even for a day or two, be it, to observe the culture, to learn from it, to listen. So with all those things in mind, let's take a pause in a moment. If there's some thoughts on that. How do you share your faith? How do we engage? How do we invite?
Dan, go ahead.
Dan, are you going or am I going?
Let me just go real quick, because I think, well, first of all, Gary, I think there's more than a few of us out there that don't know what a confessional booth is, but some of us do. And actually, when I was leaving the Catholic Church, I always thought that we would end up being Unitarians because we had several friends that were Unitarians. And it was a bit of a awakening because they weren't Christian. It wasn't a Christian church. And that's when it dawned on me, I am. And so it makes me much more comfortable saying I'm a Christian. It also makes it easy when I say I'm a Mennonite because people have no idea what a Mennonite is and they think I'm Amish or something like that. I also really appreciated your comment about people less identified as Christian but do identify as spiritual, and I think, and that's a great place. That's okay. We can be there, and I thought that's a good place we can start and have these conversations. That's all.
Go ahead.
Dan, I'm really glad you said that, because I also have the same experience that you have, and I know you know that. Hank and I also went to the Unitarian Church, and I'm sitting there and I'm going, I couldn't get my head around what they were saying based upon my background in theology, and it came down to they don't believe in the Trinity, which is the basis for Christianity. And I hold on to the belief in the Trinity. And from there, I express my faith. But I'm also extremely careful when I present an aspect of my faith, because there's an assumption many, many times that I make that people have the same experiences and knowledge and education that I have. And so I will share something, and that happened just this last week. And Jill will verify that. I made an assumption with Jill, and I know Jill fairly well, but I made an assumption, and she came back very lovingly. And I realized that she's on the same path I am. So my sharing was redundant. But I know she took it gracefully, and it was more of a step of dialogue. And I know she's very busy and she's got a lot on her mind. So I wasn't really expecting any response. But what I shared with her, I thought would be helpful in her personal journey. Again, making an assumption. And I have difficulty sometimes with that. So I stick my neck out. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
I'd just like to add real quick, a good way example of sticking one's neck out is, for instance, we've been fortunate enough to be part of the Interfaith Coalition on Wednesdays, to stand in front of the Capitol with signs for equality and announcing, the Christian message in a silent, prayerful vigil as people walk by. So there's a physical presence way of doing that. And we invite you all, whoever has the chance, at noon on Wednesdays in front of the state capitol. What a better place I can't think of to express humility and equality than in front of a powerful building like that. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Was there, CAC, did you have something you wanted to say? No, okay.
I think for me, the short answer is I really don't invite. If someone asks me a question, I'll be happy to answer it as best as I can. But, I used to think that Catholicism, Christianity was the only way to go. And I don't believe that anymore. When you look at all the religions, and that's just kind of the way we group people together, at the core, most of them have much more in common than they have any differences. And so I guess I'm sort of past that. I don't presume to say how I have chosen to live out my faith life is any better than yours. It suits me at this particular time, but I probably believe a lot of things, a lot more things about the world and about creation and about spirituality and spirit than I ever did when I was younger or in my middle ages. So I guess I'm beyond all that. There's a rich depth to many, what I'm going to just say as a religion. But at the core, people are generally seeking the same things in life, their desires and their hopes and their dreams and their spirit are pretty much, we're all connected. So we're pretty much, I'm going to say, of one mind and heart in a lot of things. So the short answer is I really don't invite. I just live my life. And if someone sees something that they want to ask or are drawn to something, I'll explain what my beliefs are as best I can. But it's not my common practice.
That's probably true for most of us. We're more comfortable with being evangelists of, if you want to call it that, of example, as opposed to one of engagement. However, I think people of other faiths are interested in, a dialogue does not mean a debate. And that's a huge difference. I love a dialogue. I'm not very competitive, so debates usually don't go well, particularly in religious conversations. But conversations, like to find to be curious about other traditions, while at the same time finding strength and a home, if you will, in your own tradition. To me, that's a rich place. And I know that Paul's objective probably in Athens was to persuade. But usually my goal isn't so much as to persuade as to discover deeper meaning and connection to those I'm in conversation with. And by doing that, I suppose we witness that in itself can be a witness to Christianity isn't a threat to you. It's, but shouldn't be a threat to people. We've come to our hour, so we better move into response and sharing.